Can you decorate for Christmas before Thanksgiving and still be a Christian? Is coexisting with people that you disagree with an unrealistic ideal? And should we all turn off the TV and crack open another book from time to time? We talk about all this and more on this week's episode of Faith and Pop Culture. Hey, well, what's up, guys? Welcome to episode number 35 of the Faith and Pop Culture Podcast. It is me, your host, Daniel, and I am joined at the desk, as I always am, by the Emperor to my new groove, Mr. Samuel David Kemp. What is up?
What a classic and underrated movie that is. Like, Emperor's New Groove.
Oh,
we just don't talk about that enough, I don't think.
Because we should be talking about it all the time.
Yeah.
It would be enough to... Like, it is. If you've never seen Emperor's New Groove, like,
shame on you.
Like Da Vinci's Last Supper, Michelangelo's David, and like Emperor's New Groove. Like, just the peak of artistic creation.
Our civilization peaked when it produced Emperor's New Groove, and it's all been downhill since then.
Yeah, we're all living in a post Emperor's New Groove world.
I'll bring the graph next time to demonstrate just how far we've fallen from.
But speaking of living in the post something world, we're also living in a post-election advertisement world.
Yes.
Can I get an
amen? Hallelujah.
So we should say right off the start that we are recording this on Election Day, on Tuesday. So we, our future selves that you are listening to, we don't know how the election turned out.
Yeah.
We can assume, prove myself as a prophet, that a lot of people are happy and a lot of people are not happy.
I'm going to say it's a pretty close split.
Yeah, and
go on a limb here and say,
contrary to what some of the predictions said, I believe that I can see that America is still standing. It has not crumbled into oblivion based on the election results.
Yeah, I think I would agree with you on that.
So we can't we can't comment on. Maybe we will next week. Or hey, maybe we'll be blissfully happy that we are a pop culture podcast and not a political podcast.
Yeah.
And we can just stay out of all of it. But one of the things that you do when you are a pop culture podcast and a pop culture ministry and channel is you go see new movies. And I went and saw a new movie over the weekend, kind of an early access release for the best Christmas pageant ever. Did you ever read that book growing up?
I don't think I mean, I recognize the name, but I couldn't tell you.
Yeah, it wasn't one.
Was this a remake? Has there already been?
I think there was an older adaptation.
Okay. I feel like maybe I saw that, but I couldn't tell you. I'm guessing it's about a Christmas pageant. But
not just a Christmas pageant. The best.
Oh.
Well. And it's a great book. It wasn't one of those that we read every single year as a tradition, but I probably read it several times growing up and saw the old adaptation. And again, we'll have the review. It was already up on our channel, so go check that out. That's not what I wanted to talk about. What I wanted to talk about is sort of the great, you may have thought that the election sort of was the big divisive issue of our time. But before we get into some of the more meaty issues on this episode, I did want to just open up that can. The question of when is it okay to start celebrating Christmas? Or I put the alternative title in our show notes of, can you decorate before Thanksgiving and still be a Christian? So this has been one of those ongoing things. I will say, I don't actually know exactly where you fall on this. I am a staunch, because I'm a solid, genuine Christian, that I believe that Christmas celebrations happen after Thanksgiving. Where do you fall on that?
Yeah, I'm 100% there. Lately it's been Black Friday, so the day after Thanksgiving, we will go and cut down a live Christmas tree and decorate and make our hot chocolate. And that's kind of the Friday after Thanksgiving. The day after Thanksgiving is when we set up the Christmas decor. It could be a little after that as well, but it could never be before.
Yeah, because I was pulling. I used to be a December 1st guy. And as I had kids and stuff, we moved to usually the day after Thanksgiving.
Yeah, I think your eternal salvation is still intact.
I'm still within orthodoxy if I'm doing it after.
If it's December 1st, yeah, that's totally fine. That's passable.
If you're doing it before Halloween, then I mean...
We have questions. There are doubts.
Only God can judge, but I have my suspicions. So I did pull... I was just curious, because this is one of those... it's, again, in most ways, maybe all ways, it's trivial. even if there is a clear right answer to it. But I thought I would pull just some like data from YouGov where they actually like pulled people and like tried to figure out, when people decorate. And it does seem that faith in humanity is still going strong because about 50% still decorate like the day after Thanksgiving or like after Thanksgiving, but before December. Early December, 16%. On Thanksgiving, 4%. But there's still, by my quick math, about 35% of people that are decorating for Christmas, the winter holiday before Thanksgiving.
But we've got our work cut out for us, Daniel. That's all I can say.
I know. We are called to be the light. And I did see there are some people here that even like the day before Christmas.
Which, again, I feel like the way I would approach it is I would skew more favorably towards like later is better. So like I think you can still be an okay person and decorate like mid-November, even like a few days before Christmas. If like I don't know why you would want to, truncate your festival celebration to just a few days, but I think that is still better than before, like any of those people who celebrate before Thanksgiving.
And it's funny too, because as judgmental of a person as I am about this, like I am myself a backslider. Like if you, like I think like traditionally, like Christmas wasn't this long month, even like December 1st until Christmas. Like like I always say, the Who's in Whoville decorate on Christmas Eve.
Yeah.
Even if you read Dickens' A Christmas Carol and stuff, like it's like a day. It's like a celebration day.
Yeah.
Not necessarily this long drawn out thing that now has become the norm. And not really a whole lot to get into with that, other than I just wanted to get that off my chest.
Yeah.
But I do think it is interesting that I feel like the root of sort of that distinction and debate or whatever, as silly as it might be, is this idea of sort of trying to preserve like this heightened experience, like this.
Yeah.
If you start decorating before if Christmas is like a 3.5 month holiday, is it still sort of that special? Like, does it still hit that? Or if you're just sort of doing it real quick, like, are you really getting the most out of this holiday? And I do think there is something within us that, like, it still is very much drawn to that sense of, okay, we want to have this like heightened experience. We want to preserve this thing as special and not like dilute it in either direction.
Yeah, I would agree. I think trying to just drag it out for too long, I think makes it less of a special experience. And I think if you do it too short, it also, you just sort of blink and you miss it. And so I think what that like middle ground is, I'm not really sure. Like I think it's probably like there's a window of like, after Thanksgiving to, I don't know, a couple of weeks before Christmas, that would maybe be sort of what I would consider the sweet spot for like, you're setting aside like a special time of year to reflect, to appreciate what we have, to celebrate the birth of Christ. But you're not just sort of dragging this out indefinitely. So I don't know. Like, I don't know what that's.
And it is this unique. It is sort of our only holiday, I think, that's like a season.
Yeah.
That's not just sort of this day. Decorate, put some Easter bunnies out a couple of days before, or like Halloween decoration. But like, you don't really have any other holidays that are a season. So I do think it is unique. But something that is convicting me, kind of use that as a jumping off point for maybe the more important conversation is, how do you sort of coexist with people that you disagree with? Even monsters that already have their Christmas stuff up, or those that voted for the wrong political party in the election, whatever party that may be. So like, how do you live with people? It's like, as you are a Christian, as a human in culture, how do you live among people that, like, in very fundamental, either in silly ways or like in like fundamental, like religion or politics or things like that? And kind of what made me think about this even more is I stumbled across an article. It was posted by Relevant magazine, and it was titled, "A Rising Number of Young Americans Are Going No Contact with Their Family Members." And just to pull kind of a few from the opening of this article, then we can jump into, the significance of it. It says more young Americans are making the choice to go no contact with family members over political, religious, or personal disagreements. According to the family sociologist Carol Palmer, who conducted a study on the trend in 2019, nearly 27% of Americans are estranged from a relative, with most reporting that they made the break in their 20s. Viral videos and social media posts have shown people sharing their stories about distancing themselves from relatives they see as toxic, pushing no contact into the mainstream. Experts have begun to refer to this as the estrangement movement. Then some of the commentary they give. It says the shift is driven in part by new ideas around what it counts as harmful or damaging behavior. Clinical psychologist Joshua Coleman notes that the definition of trauma has expanded in recent years, and as a result, many young people feel empowered to set firm boundaries to protect their mental health. Critics, however, worry that no contact may be too extreme. Some view it as a sign of hyper-individualism or a quick fix to avoid hard conversations, labeling it as more driven by a me-first culture. And we'll link the full kind of article and the one that article is referencing in the show notes. But what are you sort of seeing with some of this? Like this, I think we sort of know some of this.
Yeah.
Like just with our eyeballs, this sort of is kind of happening. But what are some of your takeaways from this sort of approach?
Yeah, I mean, I guess my first thought is it's pretty sad that it would come to something like this. Like it's just kind of heartbreaking to see that things like politics are such a divisive thing in a family that you would just cut off your family from politics or from contact. And so I think on the one side, I think it's a pretty sad indictment of just sort of how unable we are as a society to disagree but still love each other. And then on the other side, I think maybe you could see it more as, I think I like the idea of people setting boundaries. And so I think maybe the older generation would look at this and say, well, these are just a bunch of, overprotected, me-centered kids who you can kind of just look down at this. But on the other hand, I think it is okay for people to say, well, look, if I'm going to be here, for Thanksgiving or whatever, can we agree not to talk about, these topics, and can we still have a good time? And I think for the longest time, it's just always been assumed, you don't get into politics around the Thanksgiving table, especially with extended family, because that probably there are differences of opinion and likely very strong differences of opinion. And is it worth ruining the 1 or 2 days a year that you might see some of these family members because you both really disagree on social policies? I don't think so. But I don't know. I guess more people feel entitled or emboldened to say, actually, my political views are more important than my family relationships. And that's either you don't think much of your family to begin with, or maybe B, you think too highly of your own political views, I guess.
Yeah, I think a lot of this comes down to identity. Where do you get your identity from? And is it in these external things? Whatever that might be. I think, like you said, there are distinctions that need to be made because there's a positive sense of this of hey, boundaries, not a bad thing.
Yeah.
Not exposing yourself to very toxic relationship, also not a bad thing.
Right.
I think for whatever you want to say about sort of the younger generation, millennials on down, I think there is a much healthier sense of just the whole concept of mental health, that it's okay to sort of back away and kind of guard that and not just sort of suck it up and just sort of allow yourself to be verbally abused for years on end. I think there are times when sort of this no contact, at least temporarily, and some of that can be a healthy thing. I think kind of the more negative side is what you're getting at. And I think what in this some of the critics in the article mention about kind of this how we define trauma, is it so vast a definition that like it's one thing to, hey, my father, verbally abused, like that's trauma and I need to deal with that. It's different from like, hey, my neighbor voted for the other political party and like that's trauma and like now I gotta look the other way when I walk out to take the garbage out. Like that hurts me somehow that, even though we know statistically that about half the country, half the people you see voted for someone else, like, but, I'm going to do my best to avoid that 50% of the country. I think that sort of mindset of just, I guess, like, becomes very self-serving. Like, it's very much like, it's not really even about guarding yourself from, like from damage or something because you met someone in the wild, of the city that disagreed with you. It becomes more just like, I don't want to have to, like, I don't want to love people that are difficult or just relate to people that are different than me, or like, I don't want to have these conversations. I don't want my own views to like, have feedback that doesn't align and affirm what I believe. And so I'm going to sort of segment myself out, kind of, define my identity by those, whether that's like politically or religiously or, the pop culture fandom that you like whatever it is, like, I'm just sort of going to like, that's going to be my people. And like, don't need to sort of cross over it into these.
Yeah. Well, I think the result of that is just more tribalism. And I think you don't have to look far and sort of, again, as we record this on election day, like there are some tribes out there and there are some really strong feelings about said tribes. And I think it's just, I think that side of it is less healthy when you're so sort of insulated in what you believe and those around you that are closest to you, if it's all believing the same thing. I mean, obviously there's some strengths to that, but if you're never challenged on those beliefs or even just like suggested that there are other ways to behave or vote or whatnot, then I think that is where you start to see some of this societal breakdown. And I think too, like with the article, there's a lot of generalities. And so like, obviously, like you said, if an uncle is just berating you every time you see him about, whatever his political affiliation is, I mean, that's one thing versus, your aunt thinks differently than you do, but you can still be like cordial to each other. Like, so I think there is sort of a spectrum of like, are you going no contact because like they verbally assault you when they see you? Or is it like, I know, deep down that they, like the other party that I do. And so I just don't even want to be in the same room. And so I think there is some either further nuance even within this whole idea as well. And so, yeah, I mean, I think there is a place to connect with people that are very different from you. And I think that can be very healthy. Again, obviously, if you're being like verbally abused, then I'm not saying just suck it up, but I think there is just in a broad sense, a very, very much a lack of across the aisleness. And
I think there's like a lack of seeing the humanity across the aisle. Like,
right.
I know even like doing the reviews and stuff like for the collision, like I'll get comments about like almost like aghast that like I'm reviewing a movie, even if it's like a negative review, but it's like, this is a movie that like, it's not, as they were saying, it's not biblical. Like it doesn't, espouse Christian worldview or value. And just sort of this like, almost surprise that like, as a Christian, why would you engage with a movie that doesn't, isn't made by people that believe religiously the same as you for the agenda of preaching those, and targeted in a church building, like sort of this, like, this is a lost sense of like, well, like, yeah, and I don't agree with all that, but like, it's still a human that is making this, like, their stories are as they have a valuable story to tell, and I can engage with that and disagree, and like, there's nothing wrong with that. Of being like, hey, that's their worldview. I think we diverge here, and I think they're wrong about this because they don't take into account Jesus and all that kind of stuff. But like, just sort of that, I feel like that has become more and more, especially in recent years. I don't know if that's like trickled down from politics, but like, just this inability to just like, hey, you can disagree, but you still got to see sort of the image of God in them. Kind of the verse that I've been thinking about sort of in this whole season, Matthew 5:43. Just, where Jesus says, you have heard it said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, that you may be children of your Father in heaven. He causes the sun to rise on the evil and the good. He sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. If you love those who love you, what reward will you get? Are not even the tax collectors doing that? And if you greet only those, your own people, what are you doing more than others? Do not even the pagans do that? Be perfect, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect. And I feel like that is one of those, there's several sort of these types of verses that I would get a very hearty amen, like assent. I assent to that teaching of Jesus.
Yeah.
I feel like the follow through, like, in practice, lags quite a bit behind.
Yeah, I think there's no one, I don't think there's any Christians who would hear that and disagree with it. But I think if you were to check like their social media feeds, their actions may speak otherwise. And so I think that is one of those maybe more aspirational verses that people look at and like, yeah, of course that. But then in practice, is that worked out in any practical way in your life? And I think that's really where the rubber meets the road.
Yeah, and usually if you have to throw a but into your sentence, that's usually a bad sign. I'm not a racist, but, or I love all people, but if you vote for this way, or if you believe this, or, sort of the qualification on I assent in some sort of ambiguous way that I love people. I love my enemy. I love, those that, are not your own people, or, I greet all people. Like, I assent to that. I agree with that. Like, well said, Jesus. But what do we mean by sort of love? Like, I feel like the way we often apply that verse in like the context of sort of disagreement and stuff is like way watered down from, I think, what Jesus is getting at. Of like, love is not just sort of like, I sort of tolerate, them, and I just don't, I just don't look when they walk by. I just sort of live my own world, and I kind of tolerate them, I just sort of blast them on social media. But I feel like Jesus is speaking in a lot stronger terms for like, no, like, you're not going to agree with people, but like, you need to like almost go out of your way to like, in physical, like practical ways, love them and like see the humanity within them.
Yeah, and I think maybe this is most easily done like in real life, I guess, like when you're like sitting across from an actual person, or if you pass them on the street, or I think even like for us, like just we have neighbors that like I'm sure we don't agree on things politically or lifestyle or whatever, but like we can still like, if they need something, we can be there to help them with that or whatever it may be. And also vice versa. Like we have neighbors that have helped us when we've needed things. And I think sort of in real life is where I think a lot of this can sort of be manifested. Because I think online, you may try and do this online, but then you'll have to just deal with all the comments of like if you break from your tribe online, I think that's probably it's way more visible, and also you'll get a lot more pushback than if you do it in real life, as it were. Not to say that you shouldn't online, but I think as we live more and more of our lives online, I think it sort of entrenches those ideas of your tribe, and it makes it harder for you to kind of go outside of those boundaries.
I think that's huge. I think the whole algorithms online like fuel so much of this mindset too, of like it's just going to feed you more of what you already have. Like it's not like YouTube search thing, or suggested videos. Like it's not trying to broaden your horizon of like, hey, I know you typically watch conservative videos, but here's some like some liberal leaning people, or usually are this religion, but hey, here's some Islamic, Mormon, or whatever it is. Like why don't you go search these and see? Like it's very much like, hey, this is sort of, it defines you based on like your search history or whatever, and then it's just going to feed you, until you can't take any more of just that thing. I think because we've moved so much more online than like we are in the real world, I think it makes it a lot easier to sort of have this mindset of like that you can just sort of go non-contact and like break off from people, because so much of our life we're already doing that.
Yeah.
Like, we're not, and I try and combat some of that just by following like, on social media and stuff. Like, I try and follow people and like there are people I follow that I don't think I've ever agreed with at all, like in strong way, like anything they've ever said.
Yeah.
But I feel like I keep them because it's healthy to see, like, okay, like, it seemed like, the vibes in the room were all leaning this way, but maybe that's because all the people I'm around think like I do already. Like, the vibes are different in this room, or like, their opinion of this social event is different, because like, I think you almost have to be more intentional.
Yeah.
To, like, go out and like search for that stuff, because just naturally, the more we go like digital, you're just not going to get that.
Yeah, I think 100%. I think we're sort of left now, like, as we've maybe matured in this like digital world that we live in. I think it's kind of up to you to sort of make that reality that you see every day. And I think the problem is it's really hard to sort of break out of, what you've already fed the algorithm. And so, like you said, I think it's worth, on your social media stuff, like following or at least tracking what people who you won't agree with, but if they're at least thoughtful in how they present their arguments for whatever it is, religious or political, then I think you can at least somewhat crack that wall that maybe has previously been put up around you, and hopefully just see more of the humanity in other people.
Yeah, so I think something for us to keep in mind is seeing this sort of post-election, for the next couple of months or years. Yeah. Because I feel like Christians should be the ones that are more than anyone, like, because we do have a theology of the image of God and everyone's created and intention. Like, I feel like we should be the ones leading that to, like, love our enemies and greet those, even if the rest of the world seems like it's more drawn to just sort of segment itself out. Speaking of digital people and digital lives, I wanted to just briefly touch on this because I thought it was interesting. Kind of another kind of follow-up story is that kind of the movie that I reviewed last week, which was one of my most anticipated, just 'cause I thought it was interesting, was the movie Here by director Robert Zemeckis, who's Back to the Future, Forrest Gump. Like, he's done a bunch of great movies, and it's the movie that was like a fixed camera. Like, the whole movie's on like unmoving camera angles on one plot of land, and they like have Tom Hanks play like old Tom Hanks and like teenage Tom Hanks, and like, I don't know. It was one of the rare movies that I'm like, oh, like, that's not like the fifth entry in a comic book movie. Like, that's an interesting movie. So I was excited about it. It turns out no one else was excited about this movie. Yeah. So the movie did not do well. The budget was $50 million and it made $5 million. And I feel like word of mouth and stuff wasn't necessarily very good. So I don't think this is going to be one of those movies that like has a long life. Like, I think it's a bit of a bust. And so it's kind of looking into some of that. Like, I saw in an article from Deadline said, that sources told Deadline that all studios passed on Here at the package stage, seeing how it was risky and a difficult movie for broad audiences. So they struggled to get someone to help kind of finance and like release this movie. Studios were like, is this a little like, de-aged Tom Hanks and there's dinosaurs and a camera that doesn't move? Like, I think we'll pass on that and we'll go back to, superhero movies or whatever they want to do, which led to, poor Zemeckis sort of in the aftermath, sort of trying to explain, hey, it's too bad that this movie didn't do better. Said, I think the theatrical movie business is in a stressful situation right now. And kind of the one thing, again, we don't want to spend a whole lot of time on this, but just, I feel like this is another example. We've had several lately of this like circular thing where like, this seems like so many audiences are just sort of over movies, and like it's just, there's no new ideas in Hollywood. This is all we get is superheroes and comic books, and like, we need creativity and inventiveness, and then like Megapolis and Here and like sort of more original movies come out, and they all bomb. Like, and no one goes to see them, and so studios are like, okay, people don't want that. We'll give them more of Venom 3 or whatever else. Like, and this becomes this sort of thing of like, hey, we don't really want what we're getting, but like in a way we've almost become like conditioned to just go for that thing. Yeah. So there's this, like, is there any hope for us to break out of sort of the cycle?
Yeah. Without Christopher Nolan just like making 2 movies a year. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think there's so many, like you said, there's so many, I think, elements to this. And I think one of them too is just the cost of like the tickets for movies, and which I think is really prohibitive for people to like want to go take a risk on a movie, especially if they know like in a month from now that it'll be on streaming. And so there's like, I think there's a lot of different things at play, and I would agree with Zemeckis that like the movie business or the theatrical movie business is in a stressful situation right now, because it is that like I think they would want to see new and original movies like here, but I think so nowadays so much of it is like, well, a movie like that would be great for streaming. It's almost like if it's not like a big, blow up spectacle, shot on whatever, transversing different worlds and all this other, like if it isn't something that is like made for the big screen,
or just a familiar like IP property, like
yeah,
a Star Wars or Marvel or like a Jurassic Park or whatever, like,
right. If it isn't that, then it's like, well, we can just watch it at home, like, and so it becomes, because that's such a sort of fallback, I think, for so many of these movies, they can either just go straight to streaming, or it's like, okay, it bombed, but it'll be on streaming and maybe it'll have kind of a second life there. And so because there are so many other options now outside the theater, I think that also just makes it a much harder sell for people to be like, go to the theater and see this, or wait a month and you can just watch it if you want to for free, on a Friday night at your home. And so I think there is that real tension right now in the movie business. And I feel like I've always advocated for just figure out how to make those ticket prices cheaper.
Yeah,
I think
like that is the key.
Because it used to
losing
be
money, so they keep jacking up the prices. Like it's just sort of it's a spiral of like,
right.
They can't really afford to drop the prices, but like people are going to stop going to movies. Because kind of like you said, I think there is sort of this assumption now that like, the more drama, experimental stuff, like that's more like for Netflix and like the big spectacle. The problem is just that like, streaming is still not profitable by any means. Like, it may never be. Like, it's still very much an experiment that where you make movies. Like, it's one thing if a movie makes money on theaters to sort of pay back some of its budget, and then it takes off on streaming. But like, you're just not going to get a lot of like budget money spent on originals straight to streaming. I think you sort of still do now because people are trying to like sort of like sort of the Amazon model of like, if we just make enough and get people hooked in, like, and the other competition fades away, like, then we'll sort of monopolize the market. But I don't know. Like, I think there is going to be like a loss of these types of movies anywhere, like on streaming or not on streaming, just because it doesn't make sense to pay a ton of money.
Yeah. Well, and I just remember growing up, there was a thing called like the dollar theater, and it was awesome because for $1 you could go see a movie that had been out for a while. Like, so it's not opening weekend, but it's like there's no, there's really, other than the time to go see it, hey, it's $1. Like, go check it out. Like, you're going to spend some money on concessions and you might play some arcades or whatever, but it's like to me that's a way. And again, I don't know that we would ever go back to like dollar theaters, but there's got to be some ground between whatever it is, like $20 a ticket, $30 a ticket now, and $1 at a dollar theater. Like, there's got to be something in between where maybe we don't want the reclining seats or all the other bells and whistles that theaters are trying to like force on people, and just have a cheaper experience, but still the experience of communally watching something on the big screen.
Yeah, I think there is sort of the middle ground. I don't know what that is, or if the industry will be able to find that. But I thought it was interesting just to know that I think he is right. That and not just because he's sad that his movie didn't perform well. Like, I think it is sort of this weird stage we're in, that like we're sort of entering into the unknown of like what movies and stuff will look like going forward. Kind of the last topic story conversation for us to touch on is something that we've had in the show notes for a while. So we. Because it was interesting to me. Maybe it's just because I was an English major in college, so I like
probably
books. I'm a book person.
Yeah,
even more than a movie person. I review movies, but my heart is still with books. So I came across an article that kind of went viral. Sparked a lot of conversation online, and it was in the publication The Atlantic, and it was titled "The Elite College Students Who Can't Read Books." And it kind of goes into some data, some interviews of this sort of trend of just like, even like the elite, Ivy League colleges and stuff. People just like either just don't read books or like almost can't read books, don't have the attention to read books. So some of the stuff, the data that stood out to me, and then we can get into this, says, going before the colleges, the 3rd to 8th grade, when they were surveyed, classes, teachers, only 17% teachers were surveyed that they teach like whole texts. Like we're going to go over, Huckleberry Finn, and we're going to read Huckleberry Finn. Only 17% actually like read the whole book. Instead, it's become more, I think, reminiscent of like TikTok, Twitter, X, or whatever, of like very small excerpt. Like we're going to read this couple pages, and then here's a summary, and like just kind of that more bite-size approach to these stories. And then kind of the article writer says, whether through atrophy or apathy, a generation of students is reading fewer books. They might read more as they age. Older adults are the most vocacious readers, but the data is not encouraging. The American Time Use Survey shows that the overall pool of people who read books for pleasure has shrunk over the past 2 decades. A couple of professors told me that their students see reading books akin to listening to vinyl records, something that a very small subculture may still enjoy, but that's mostly a relic of an earlier time. And then kind of one of the parts in the article that made it go viral, where the guy says, teacher says, over and over, the professor I spoke to spoke with a pained, grim picture of young people's reading habits. For years, Dames, who's a teacher, has asked his first years about their favorite book. In the past, they said to books such as Wuthering Heights and Jane Eyre. Now, he says, almost half of them cite young adult books. Rick Riordan's Percy Jackson series seems to be a particular favorite, and he goes on to sort of challenge, well, that's not a good thing, that we've replaced, Wuthering Heights and Jane Eyre with Percy Jackson. And it is sparked, because there's another article kind of in response to that from the publication The Mary Sue, titled, College Professor Sparks Fierce Debate Over Criticism of a Student Who Likes Percy Jackson. And here's where they sort of sum up the divide, and then we can get into that. They say, there does seem to be a shift in reading preferences and comprehension, but not all these shifts have to be a negative. These changes could reflect readers feeling more freedom to read for fun and more confident in establishing their own likes and interests instead of feeling the pressure to appear well-read to their peers. Ultimately, writing off students for not sharing one's sophisticated taste in literature sounds far more detrimental to students' reading performance than a first-year student liking Percy Jackson. So this is an interesting conversation. I mean, and there's aspects to it that we don't have time to go down all the different roads, but I think there is sort of the idea of just reading in general seems to be, like it's sad for that to be a vinyl record. I guess there's like old-fashioned thing. I think that's an important part of this. I think the other part is this sort of that, I mean, there's always been sort of that constant divide between sort of like, like highbrow, low, like the sophisticated, the elite, I read Dickens or I read, like the, Hemingway, and as opposed to like, I read 50 Shades of Grey or like, whatever, the Twilight books are my favorite books. Like there's sort of that sort of tension of more like the popular sort of lower level literature as opposed to sort of the more established stuff. But what are some of your, because we're both book people.
Yeah. And I was not like growing up, I was not a big reader. And I think I've only like just later in life become a better reader, but also like someone who just prioritizes reading more than what I did growing up. And so I totally can understand just sort of that idea of like, I think it's probably better to read something than to read nothing. And so on the one hand, I think it is, hey, if Percy Jackson is the thing you're into, good for you, I guess. But on the other hand, I think if you're like a, 18-year-old, 19-year-old in college, it's, I think there's just some weird stuff with how some of it's worded. So it's like, okay, maybe Percy Jackson was what kind of got you into reading, and so that's considered your favorite book. But it would be interesting to maybe look further and to see, well, are they reading other books as well? Or is this like, because like your favorite book, that's a pretty subjective question. And I think and I do think there probably is a lot of people who would feel, at least in years past, like they need to say one of the classics to look like I'm cool and, you know, I'm not a total loser. And so it's like, well, I'll just, you know, say Mark Twain or something and appear sophisticated and
Was it
well
Mark Twain?
read.
I forget the exact quote. I think it was Mark Twain that like defined classic literature. So those are the books that like everyone has on their bookshelf, but no one read.
Yeah. So I think that, I mean, I think, you know, reading is better than not reading. And then I think if you can read more and maybe even more challenging books is, you know, better than to not, you know, to only read like the stuff that, you know, is just fun, I guess. But yeah, I don't know. It's one of those things that I think I can see kind of both sides of this, and I don't know. I just think it to me, the saddest thing is just that like so few people are reading and that teachers are only teaching like parts, which seems kind of absurd to me on a lot of levels, that like you wouldn't just, why not teach the whole story?
I mean, I have school age kids like in that range, and it's like they're at school a long time. Like,
Yeah.
I know they got to learn a lot of stuff, but like there's time to get through
Yeah.
And like my kids, their school, they do read full books. I mean, they're still shorter. They're not like, you know, War and Peace yet.
Sure. Well, I mean, like, because there's a lot of books that, like, I've tried to read some of the Russian classics, and, like, even still, it's like, oh, man, like, some of this is, like, it's just really dense. It's hard to get through, and you really have to be, like, committed, you know, to, like, finish, you know, the Brothers Karamazov or something like that. Whereas, like, you know, it's much easier to read, you know, other authors who are just, you know, it reads faster, it's more interesting, it's more of a page turner. So I don't know.
Yeah, I think there's valid things on both sides. Like, I think on the one sense, you do have sort of that elitist mindset of like, you know, the only stories that matter are the ones that were written like 500 years ago.
Yeah.
Everything else since then is just, you know, like I think stories are stories. I think stories are powerful, and like, you know, I think the advantage that some of the older ones has is like they've been proven by time to be great, and we still read them because, you know, we still read Shakespeare, not just because he's Shakespeare, but because time has proven that he's timeless, and like his stories are great, and
Yeah.
you know, so I think it has that advantage. But I think almost this like built-in assumption that like if it's sort of more popular level, or like, you know, like a Percy Jackson, like that there's no value, you don't get any value out of it. It's just junk food. I think it's just not true. I think there's value in kind of stories. I think on the other side, in some ways, it almost ties into what we just talked about with the movies. I feel like literature and books have almost gone through the same like progression of like, it's like just sort of funneled down to more like easily accessible, not challenging, kind of, you know, more floaty. Like it's, you know, it's like I know a lot of young, you know, the biggest readers of young adult literature are like grown adults. Like it's not young. Like it's sort of still stuck in some of the stuff that's written sort of, you know, not that there's anything wrong with ever reading those books, but like just not challenging you in the same way.
Yeah.
Or like not, you know, just not maybe quite as like rich as far as like, you know, thematically, or just, you know, I think there's value in reading a book that requires patience, and you got to really work through, as opposed to just like, you know, a brisk page turner with a cliffhanger every chapter. And like, you know, like those are great for the beach, but like I feel like we are losing something, and I feel like it's kind of recent too. Like, I don't think we've really seen what a culture looks like, you know, that's more getting those stories and stuff from like social media or TikTok or whatever.
Yeah.
Or just streaming, as opposed to like a culture, you know, like reading has always been a thing, a foundational thing.
Yeah. What does an illiterate but informed culture look like? That, I mean, that'll be interesting. Like because I mean, even like literacy rates, I think, have kind of fallen off a cliff, too. And some of it, you know, we've been like, we have, our oldest is in kindergarten, and the whole like learn to read with phonics versus like sight words, which I didn't even know was a thing. And it's just basically like memorizing what words look like rather than like how they sound out and like what the letters actually do within a grouping. And so some of it even comes back to like early education, like teaching kids to actually read and not just sort of shuffling them to the next grade, and now it's somebody else's problem. And then I think you get to college and you're not able to focus on a book for a semester, or you can only do like a portion of it. And I think what I think college and university should be is that training ground to, okay, well, I don't understand this book, but we're going to go through it for a semester, and by the end of it, I will know how to approach a book like this that I may not otherwise read. Like there wasn't a lot of books that I was reading in like college English that I was like, can't wait to read this on my spare time. Like they were challenging because you're in school to learn. And so I think there's also just this, I think, responsibility of the university to challenge students with like whole text and text that maybe their students wouldn't read, at the beach, but it's still worth kind of working that muscle of reading and comprehension and critical thinking that it's hard to get outside of college.
Yeah, and I think just instilling a love for reading. And maybe that's what more a pro Percy Jackson thing of just like, I feel like the reason a lot of people don't read after like high school is because reading was just a painful thing they had to do.
Yeah.
And I feel like if you can get someone just to love reading, like I didn't start loving reading by reading the Russian classics. Like I was reading, like, pulpy fantasy novels, and like that led to I just love reading, and now I can read other stuff. And I do think just from a Christian perspective, we can maybe end there, but it's like God did give his special revelation about himself through like the written word.
Yeah.
He could have done that in the age of TikTok and YouTube, or like, there's other ways he could have maybe done that. And I think because you hear people talk about Christianity, Christians being like more people of the book. Obviously referring to like the Bible, but I feel like you can almost expand that, like not in the same degree of importance, but like just of like the word, like of language. Yeah. And I feel like there is sort of that. I think that God did that just affirms like there's power in words and in the written language. I think as a culture, but especially as Christians, we should be not too quick to sort of move away from that as some like outdated relic, and we got videos. We don't need that stuff because there's a lot of great wisdom in stories. But speaking of things that may or may not have great wisdom and don't show the written word, but they sometimes adapt the written word, and that is movies, which leads us to the next segment of this podcast. We have Out Now and Coming Soon. So the first Out Now, we already kind of talked about it here. I like this movie. It didn't I can see why people didn't resonate with. Like it's a weird kind of movie, and I think if you go in expecting it to function like a normal movie with like normal character development and a plot, and like it just doesn't work that way. But I feel like if you go in okay, this movie's doing something different. This isn't just like a narrative movie. Like it's a more like thematic. It's almost more like standing before a painting than it is like a movie. I just think it's interesting, and like it's doing things that I haven't seen before, which is someone that reviews movies every week. Like that's refreshing. Yeah. I haven't seen this 1,000 times, before. So hey, maybe go see it, or wait
maybe one thumb up.
One enthusiastic thumb up, and maybe a half thumb that's sort of wavering a little bit. As far as coming soon, kind of the movie that's coming out this week, which we also mentioned, the best Christmas pageant ever. I had the chance to see and review this one early, so check out my full review on the channel. But it's good. It's hard to go wrong with a good Christmas movie.
Is it a feel-good?
It's a feel-good movie. It's by the director is Dallas Jenkins, who's known for making The Chosen. Like, I don't know if he's ever done any like film. Like, so it's still, I don't know. In some ways, I think you can see some like inexperience maybe with the film, but I think he does the story justice. So good, guys. Go check out that. Although maybe he might not want me to say this, but maybe wait a couple weeks and get a little closer to Christmas, maybe the other side of Thanksgiving, to enjoy this movie. The other movies, I'm not sure if I'll be able to check it out or not. I'm kind of hoping to. It's been an extra busy schedule, but Heretic. I don't know if you've seen anything about.
I have, and that looks. I was hoping you might go review that because
like
it looks pretty interesting.
It's a movie. It's like a R-rated horror movie. Like, I don't know necessarily how much like broad appeal to Christians it's going to have.
Probably not,
but it's a movie that is like very, at least from some of the early reviews and stuff, like it's dealing with, I think the movie is like two
Mormon missionaries
go to some guy's house, and and then he sort of brings them in, and he's a big creep.
A game of cat and mouse.
And they and they sort of have these like theological debates and stuff, and I'm sure it descends into like crazy horror stuff. But it just looks like it's a movie that would have a lot of interest. Like, I'd be curious to see how Hollywood and like a studio like A24 deals with theological stuff like that.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping to maybe check that one, so stay tuned. There's also a movie, Elevation, which I didn't even realize was coming out. It's like an alien invasion movie. It has like some notable actors in it.
I hadn't heard of it.
And I hadn't heard of it either. It was not a good sign. So I probably won't be checking that out, but hey, you never know, because I do love myself some alien movies. But something that I will be checking out in just the next few moments is the next segment of this podcast. We have things we like that you should like too.
So this week I thought I'd keep it a bit short and sweet, and that is an enthusiastic recommendation of an Instagram account that I stumbled upon recently. Speaking of, algorithms and how you're just like fed the stuff that you would like, apparently my algorithm knows me well, and I stumbled upon this account. It's called Groove by Grace, and it's this group of, I think, 3 or 4 musicians, and they take like classic like hymns that you probably sang when you were growing up as a kid and have turned it into just really cool jazz. And I don't know anything else about it other than that, because there's like, I've tried to find like an album that maybe they released or a website, but it's just like an Instagram account with like no links to anything else. And so go on Instagram, check them out. Just some really tight grooves by Grace.
Yeah, well, I'm all about groove. Hey, we started off this episode with the Emperor's New Groove, and then full circle.
Wow, and that wasn't even planned.
We're in sync with that, and with some grooves by Grace. But hey, also want to thank you guys for joining us once again in this post-election crazy world that we're in. Hey, life continues to go on, and there will continue to be stories and just ways that as Christians we can be engaged with the culture around us, and not just like engaged and aware of, but like, hey, actually step into it and contribute and join that conversation. So we're glad that you joined us this week. We hope that you will join us again next week, every Thursday, for more conversations on faith and pop culture.